Hello everyone, this is Module 2, which is titled Overview of Alaska Native Peoples, Lands, and Origins, which may not sound like that exciting of a title, but it is a very exciting module and also super essential to everything that comes after in this class, so buckle up, you're going to learn some stuff. So first of all, I want us to have a bit of moment of reflection. If this was a face-to-face class, this would be a discussion. Of course, we can't do that right now, since it's not a face-to-face or synchronous class. What you could do is just discuss with yourself out loud. That might get you some strange looks from people around you. You could maybe start up a random conversation with the person sitting next to you on the bus about this topic. That might also get you some strange looks. Perhaps best would be if you would just write down some thoughts. But I want you to think about this question. Why might learning about Alaska Native cultures and peoples be relevant to my career, or my studies, or my life? So I'm going to pause and let you write down a few thoughts. Okay, well, I've taught this class several times and gotten some really good different kinds of answers from people. For some people, it is very clear for them how learning about Alaska Native cultures is relevant to their career. For example, they might be working at a tribal health clinic. For example, they might be working in the oil industry and specifically on North Slope lands. They might be doing rural health work. There's a lot of ways in which that might be directly relevant. For other people, you might see the relevance as you think about it, right? You might say, well, I am working in such and such industry, right? For example, I'm working in journalism, and then you might reflect on the fact that, well, about 1 in 5 Alaskans are Alaskan Native, and that is a major part of the news environment of our landscape is issues affecting Native people, right? So I think for a lot of us, these things are relevant to our career. But if nothing else, it should be relevant to our studies and our life, right? Because if you want to be a well-educated resident of these lands, I think that must include knowing about the indigenous peoples and the indigenous histories of this landscape. That just has to be part of that puzzle. All right, well, with that in mind, this lesson's kind of an overview lesson. And so I want us to think about why are maps useful? Because that's kind of what we're doing with this overview. We're trying to give you a map of the different cultures and languages of Alaska, this kind of bird's eye map, in fact. And we'll go much more in depth later in the semester to specific groups, right? Spending entire weeks on specific groups. But in this lesson, it's all bird's eye kind of stuff. Why is that helpful? Why is that useful? I think of it like this. If you're trying to make sense of North America, right? If I zoom in, and all I can see is Soldotna, where I live, there's some things I will understand really well, the Soldotna environment, but I won't understand much about the overall ecological makeup of North America, or why certain areas have to worry about water distribution and other areas don't in the same ways, or why certain areas are prone to earthquakes and others aren't, or why certain areas are densely populated and others aren't, right? So it's helpful to have that overarching map of sort of the environments of North America, as well as the political boundaries of North America. If you're trying to understand Soldotna, you have to understand it in context of the sociological and political climate of the entire state, which that in turn you have to understand it in terms of the United States, which in turn you have to understand in terms of the entire world, right? So having bird's eye views can be helpful to kind of situate the more narrow pinpoint view that we'll do later in the semester. Of course, keep in mind as we're doing that, maps can be deceptive in the sense that, we're going to show you give you some different senses of like, well, there's this culture and this culture. But remember, for example, that when we're talking about Dena'ina as a distinctive culture and language, that there are in fact 5 different dialects within that one language, outer, upper, inner, Iliamna, and Sildovia. And furthermore, that you have other language groups that are next door, and where those two language groups meet up, there might be some more blending between the two. So what I'm trying to get at there is every village, right, every social group is going to have its own uniqueness, even within its bigger culture. So, keep that in mind as we're doing the bird's eye view stuff. But the learning objectives for today are pretty straightforward. First, I'm going to define cultures, because cultures can mean a lot of things. We're going to talk about what we mean by that in this course, Alaska Native Cultures. Number 2, we're going to get really nerdy about environmental stuff. We're going to talk about the land of Alaska from kind of a geographic environmental perspective and how that influences the rich cultures that we see in our state today. We're going to talk about languages, part 3, and the main Alaska Native languages, of which there are 20. Yes, you heard me, 20. We'll then talk about some of the major culture groupings that we'll use kind of to understand this huge diversity that is indigenous Alaska. And then we're going to talk about some things with current population, villages, and native corporations, and kind of some of the main ways in which Alaska Native people are organized in the state of Alaska today.